Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, we're putting the rom to the com with author and publicist extraordinaire Caroline McBride. Caroline's new book, Four Seasons at Cutler's, is the second to feature public relations director and serial dater Charlotte McPherson. As her longtime place of employment, Angelino's, is taken over by the Cutler Restaurant Group, Charlotte finds herself torn between two men, her new boss Travis and her longtime friend and recent beau Wyatt. While Travis is worldly and sophisticated, Wyatt, an internationally renowned documentary filmmaker, is endearing but elusive. Determined to reconcile her head and heart, globetrotting Charlotte gives herself 1 year to decide which man is the one. As a publicist of nearly 20 years, Caroline has worked in the hospitality, technology, and beauty industries and spent 12 years as the Director of Public Relations and Business Development for Serafina Group, helping to launch restaurants around the world. She holds both a BA in Political Science and an MA in International Relations. Caroline's dream of becoming an author was realized with the publication of Four Seasons at Angelino's, which drew on her exciting career and extensive travels for inspiration. Four Seasons at Cutler's is similarly grounded in travel and taste buds. Journalist Celia Schatzman said, "Full of real life and laughter, this romp of a read will take you all around the world to show you that sometimes you don't have to go that far to find true love." Now, join us as Caroline McBride takes us inside the world of restaurants and romance, where love and laughter are always on the menu.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Central Booking. Today, I am in conversation with Caroline McBride, who is the author of Four Seasons at Cutler's, which is available right now from Post Hill Press. It's actually the follow-up to Four Seasons at Angelino's. Welcome to the show, Caroline. It's so nice to have you here.
Hi, John. It's so nice to be with you.
And we're also complimentary with like our greens. I love it. We're all kinds of green. So I have to ask you about this book, which, as I was telling you before we started recording, was a real refreshing experience for me, kind of like a palate cleanser, because most people know me for mystery and murder and mayhem, fictional, of course. But I read all across the board, and we are in Halloween season. It'll probably be November by the time that, people see this interview, but I have been in a very dark space with my reading and viewing to sort of celebrate the season. So to have a rom-com to fall into is a real pleasurable experience. So thank you for the escapism of that.
My pleasure. That's the purpose. It's supposed to be escapism, lighthearted, and funny. However, speaking of Halloween, we do have Dia de los Muertos in the Mexico City chapter. So because it's 4 seasons and it takes place over a year, we're able to hit most of the major holidays throughout the book.
Yeah, that's one of the fun parts, and we're definitely going to talk about that. But you are right. There are costumes. There is really great food. It really is a travelogue, so we're definitely going to come back to that point. But I have to ask you, so Four Seasons at Cutler's, it's really a follow-up or a continuation story to your first book, but it does stand alone. So people who are not familiar with the first book can absolutely pick this up and be fully satisfied. But I'm wondering, can you give us the setup specifically for this new book, and then tell us what you think we need to know in terms of backstory for what came before?
Absolutely. So maybe I'll address the second part first, just to go over the backstory. I did intentionally write the second book so that it can be read alone. So people do not have to read the first book. But in the first book, we meet Charlotte McPherson, who is a restaurant publicist, and she's based in New York City, and she's running around the world, very dedicated to her career, opening restaurants everywhere. But she's also looking for love and dating all the wrong guys and going through the matchmaker and the internet dating and everything that people are going through these days who are trying to find somebody. And throughout the story, there's Wyatt Ashcroft, who is a friend of hers for 10 years, and they're sort of falling in love with each other. And that brings us to the second book, where, as we know, romantic comedies by definition have happy endings. So this is why I like the genre. So the first book has a happy ending. Second book, things get a little more complicated. And the first restaurant group is an Italian restaurant group based in New York called Angelino's. And the second book there's a takeover, without giving too many spoilers, but there's a takeover that happens, an acquisition that's led by a restaurant group based in Texas. So sort of as a backdrop, we have these warring restaurant groups with two totally different management styles. And the new boss is pretty interesting and gives Charlotte a lot more attention than her elusive man, Wyatt. So therein lies the love triangle.
There you go. Excellent transitional point. I was going to ask you about that because all of a sudden, Caroline has all kinds of interest between Wyatt, who's a little bit more hands-off. It's one way to put it. And Travis, who is her new boss. And so they are very, very different in their personality. So I'm wondering, if you can tell us a little bit about the differences of these two men and then what appeals most about each of them to your main character.
So Wyatt Ashcroft is this very elusive Hollywood producer, and he has all kinds of quirky films that he makes for the good of society. He started as an action picture producer, made a lot of money, and then decided to dedicate his craft to a cause, which is the environment. So we sort of, there's a lot of satire in this book, and so we have some fun with the vegetarian crowd and animal rights activists. But what's nice is there are also messages that are incorporated, and he's a good guy, but he's aloof, and he's so focused on work that he forgets about Charlotte, sometimes forgets about his love life, and she's feeling a bit neglected. So then you have Travis Cutler, who is the grandson actually of the founder of Cutler's restaurant group, and he is the complete opposite of Wyatt. He's Southern, he's half Mexican, he's got a very cool vibe, but he's also very proper and, holds the door open for the ladies and very old school. But most of all, he's very attentive to Charlotte. And I mean, after all, they work together. So, as we know, some people are so dedicated to their jobs that their colleagues they see them more than their own family or their significant others. So we explore that in the book, and she's kind of, madly in love with Wyatt, but sometimes you can love somebody if they're not available. You have to ask yourself, are you wasting your time? And then maybe the person you're meant to be with is right in front of you and you didn't realize it. So these are the themes that we go over in the book.
Sure, it's a fun little triangle. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more specifically about Wyatt, and I don't think that this is a spoiler, but there is, Charlotte begins questioning whether or not he may actually be on the autism spectrum because, as you said, he is very much aloof. His social awkwardness is referred to, and he doesn't always, think of other people's needs or feelings. He's kind of very much consumed with himself. And I'm wondering, how you address that in a way that's sensitive to the realities of people who actually live, with the condition of autism. And it is a wide and vast spectrum.
Oh, yes. I'm so glad that you brought that up because this was something that I feel very passionately about. I feel that these days people, when somebody is acting what society doesn't consider as the norm, they'll say, well, maybe he's on the spectrum. Maybe she's on the spectrum. I personally have received that myself. So, well, yeah, but these days you have, well, by the way, side note, there's a book called Autism in Heels, and it's about how women with autism, they know how to mimic others so they can hide the condition. But we're living in an age where you have people like Elon Musk. When he was on Saturday Night Live, he said he was the first person with Asperger's to host the show. I feel that there's less stigma, and I'm very happy about that because I feel that as we progress, people are understanding more and more about this condition. And like you said, it's a wide spectrum. So you have Asperger's, autism, different variations. And as I write in the book, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not one to diagnose, but more and more, I can tell you out in the dating scene, I hear women ask themselves or ask one another, I should say, like, do you think he's on the spectrum? Like, why doesn't he write back? And sometimes it's like, he's just either not into you or he's busy or you have a different concept of time or maybe he is. But this is something that is becoming more and more common, I think, in the dating world, and as we fall in love with other people or get to know other people. There's a lot of things going on out there mentally, but it doesn't mean anybody's a bad person. It just means you should learn how to communicate with them. And if you can do that, then you hit a home run.
Absolutely. I mean, I love, seeing that this question is becoming part of mainstream fiction, because my background, is actually in developmental, or intellectual disabilities. I worked at a nonprofit for about a decade, and in special, needs within school systems before that. And it was fascinating because there would be people, who are obviously on the spectrum, and then other people you wouldn't know, unless they told you. So it's just interesting, and it's nice to see it making its way into mainstream storytelling, because it does, normalize it, because this is normal for a lot of people, and for other people who it might not be normal for, it becomes, I think, regular once you actually start to, see it and think about it in storytelling. So I liked seeing that. It was something I really appreciated that you brought out in this book. And now I'm going to step off my soapbox and get back to you. But I did want to ask, about Charlotte. She is, as you mentioned, she's working in the restaurant industry, which is something that you also have a background in. You were the director of public relations and business development for the Serafina Restaurant Group. And, overall, you have about 2 decades experience in hospitality, technology, the beauty industry. So that's a lot. So you know what it's like to be a woman in worlds that a lot of times still are probably male dominated in some respects. And in this book, at times, we see Charlotte struggling with sexism, whether it's subtle or not, and double standards. And so I'm wondering, if you can talk about why you wanted to bring that into her experience, and how also, you were able to draw on your own experiences to inform that aspect of her story.
Absolutely. Well, even though it's a rom-com, I did want to bring in some serious themes, because I think it makes Charlotte more relatable and it's more realistic. And as you mentioned, we do go over women in the workplace, some sexism, some issues with equal pay, and issues that women are really facing these days. And I wanted to make it believable, to bring in these topics and kind of make her add layers to her as a character. She's not just this PR woman who gets everything handed on a platter. She has to work very hard. She has to deal with very strenuous work situations all around the world. So in my former role at Serafina, they always say, write what you know, especially these are my first 2 novels. So I wanted to write about my own work experience. Me writing a detective story wouldn't be as good as me writing about an industry that I know inside and out. And that's exactly what I know about the hospitality, public relations industry, and how they're melded together. While at Serafina, I traveled around the world and opened restaurants in India, Russia, Brazil, Turkey, just to name a few places. And every chapter in the book is named after a different city, or it takes place in a different city. I only write about places that I've been, because I want to keep it, I don't want to be disingenuous by writing about somewhere where I've never been. So I write about places that I know, places that are familiar to me. When you travel, you get off the plane, there's a certain vibe, like when in Seattle, there's something about the trees, or Miami, that wind, that tropical wind that hits you. Everything's sort of different in every city, and everything's very unique. And I wanted to touch upon the beauty in different places. So writing about things that I experienced were very important for me to incorporate, and also writing about a career woman who's had the same career as I have made it all the more enjoyable.
Sure. So I'm glad that you mentioned the travel aspect of the book, because now I don't have to ask you about that. But I did really enjoy it. As I was telling you before we started recording, it really did feel like a travelogue to me. And it's beautiful escapism, especially for a lot of us who, don't really get to travel, or at least not to the extent that we might want to or used to. But there is so much culture in this book. You get the sights, the sounds, the smells. You will be very hungry reading this book. I should probably tell people, like, if you're going to sit down with this book, pour yourself a glass of wine, make yourself a bowl of pasta, or, if you're into steak, get a nice cut of steak, and you will have a real experience with this book, because it'll make you hungry. But I really did feel like I traveled the world with Charlotte, and that was a lot of fun. And so you get culture in sort of a very natural way, but people looking for that sort of escapism, that's another, way that they will get that throughout this book. Like you said, pretty much every chapter takes place in a different place. So you really are traveling the world with Charlotte and her colleagues, which is great. Wanted to
There's
ask you.
20, oh, sorry to
No,
interrupt. There's
please.
20 different cities, in case people are wondering.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, it's a whirlwind. She's traveling a lot for work and then for pleasure as well.
I think I got like a little jet lag. I was like, I have literally been all over the world in a couple hours. I need to take a break. It was awesome though. So let me ask you too. So, we talked a bit about your background, something like 2 decades in publicity, which means you obviously started when you were like 12, because come on. But, I call it like I see it. But I think a lot of times, like, people who aren't in that industry, we hear terms like publicity or public relations, and we maybe don't grasp the finer details of that. So can you tell me, what it is that you see as the core tenets of that job? And then how have those changed with time and technology and things like the growth of social media, which has sort of changed everything?
Absolutely. So public relations, especially in the hospitality world, it's so important, because it's all about the message that you want to send to people. Why should people eat at your restaurant instead of the restaurant down the street, especially when we're talking about New York City, where there's tens of thousands of restaurants? And so part of what you want to do as a publicist is, of course, it helps when you have amazing food that you're representing. And I've always been blessed that it's been the case. Obviously, Serafina is one of the best restaurants in New York City. It's a chain. Right now, there's over 30 locations. But then I've also represented steak houses and other restaurants. One quick shout out, Mariposa in Sedona, Arizona. Absolutely beautiful, stunning, amazing food. And you see the passion behind the food. And even it's not just about the food nowadays too, it's the ambiance as well. So the job of a publicist is to message with the public, and obviously the media most of all, and present the restaurant at its finest. So it's actually a great job. And also that rolls over into hospitality as far as hotels are concerned as well. Even the beauty industry too. Why should somebody buy this lipstick instead of the 5,000 other options that they have? So it helps when you have celebrity branding. I worked with a cosmetics company, and the face of the brand was Kate Moss. So that helped. We did events, we got tons of press, but also, the quality of the product is ultimately at the end the most important. And in the case of restaurants, you just want to get people in and experience the best new dish or the best classic dish that's offered. And publicists, really, they're messengers at the end of the day. And they're spreading the word why you need to try this or have that or stay at that hotel. You're trying to convince and persuade the general public. And then also another side of working in publicity is dealing with any bad or negative press, which unfortunately happens to the best of the best. There will be somebody unhappy. You can't always please everybody. And especially in the restaurant industry, you have to keep in mind, it's very service oriented. So if your waiter's having a bad day and takes it out on the diner, that can be very problematic, because then they'll go vent on Yelp or somewhere. And it's like, wait a minute, was the food okay? Was the ambiance great? But okay, the service was bad. We can work on that.
Right.
But that's one of the hardest things, because you can ask people, will you give us another chance? And we're really sorry that the service wasn't up to your standards, but let us try again. So you can try to convince people, try to reason with people. I've spent countless, if you added up over the years, hours with people upset that I'm trying to convince them not to be upset or trying to make amends, so to speak. So that brings us into the second part of your question, which was, how have things changed? Because before it used to be, oh, there's a restaurant critic coming in and warn everybody and do the booking, and now they have lost power, because what's happening is people will go on Yelp, as I mentioned before, or other websites to see what their peers are saying about a particular restaurant, because maybe the 45-year-old woman who was the restaurant critic has a different palate, right? So it's only natural that you want to see, let me just read 4 or 5 reviews, and you keep seeing like, oh, best pizza I've ever had in my life, from other people, must have good pizza. So the general public is now they now carry more weight than your traditional food critic. And with that, user-generated media is more and more important in publicity. And when I say that, I mean especially social media, TikTok. When something goes viral on TikTok, it can really make a brand or a hotel or a restaurant. And that's something, as publicists, that it becomes it's so different, because instead of just dealing with journalists and reporters and traditional media, it's about getting the influencer to post a 15-second video, which we get into this with Four Seasons at Cutler's, where Charlotte, she thinks that this influencer, pretty appetite goddess, they call her Paggy, and Charlotte's not taking this very seriously. She's like, she's just going to come in, twirl her hair, and, it's probably an attractive woman, and say something dumb, but it's going to lead to so many likes and views that it will really help the restaurant. So, okay, fine. But when this influencer shows up, she's a very smart businesswoman, and she actually starts teaching Charlotte a few things. And Charlotte had underestimated her, but it is reflective of real life now that influencers have so much influence, hence the, the label influencers. So you still need to cater, though, is your client. You don't want 22-year-olds necessarily talking about a high-level luxury cosmetic line that their peers would never be able to afford. So then you want to tap into more micro influencers and people at a different age group, different geographical location. So it's a very interesting transition, what's been going on in the PR world.
Yeah, it's wild, and it changes every 5 minutes. And just when you think you know what the next thing is going to be, there's a next thing, and then you have to adjust to that. But like you said, it's interesting because we're all critics now. I mean, you go to a restaurant and everybody has their phone out taking a picture of their food or doing what they're doing. But I loved that you mentioned the influencer in this book, because she is a very minor character, but it gives you so much to think about, because you sort of take for granted the power that she actually holds, and why she does what she does and how she does what she does. And then you realize that she is really, really smart and sophisticated, and she has a plan, and she doesn't care how she comes across to you. But I mean, it's money in the bank for her, and she really can make or break a restaurant. And she's just a person walking around with her phone, like you said, uploading a 15-second video to Instagram or TikTok. But there really is power in that today, which is kind of wild.
It's amazing. And while you mentioned TikTok, I hadn't joined until a few months ago, because everybody's talking about book talk. And so I thought I better get on. I mean, of course, for clients, I would look, but I never found it necessary to have my own account. But now I see that book talk has just lit up, and it's made some authors that like really brought them to another level.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are people who've languished for years, and all of a sudden it goes viral and they have a best-selling book. And it's kind of nice because it can be traditionally published, it can be independent, self-published authors, and it's kind of leveled that playing field, which is very, very interesting. So switching gears from that aspect of things, I have to ask you too. Obviously, the title is Four Seasons at Cutler's. The first was Four Seasons, Angelino. So we get the sense that obviously the book is segmented into different parts. So you get 4 distinct parts, and really it is the seasons of Charlotte's life as they match up with the seasons of the world. Can you talk about what appealed to you specifically about that setup, and how you see it as sort of reflecting some of the themes that you play with in these books?
Yes, well, I like organization, and I think for a reader, they're following a journey. I think with romantic comedy, people often, they like it short and sweet and of course interesting, and they know Four Seasons. Okay, so it's 1 year and we start with spring and then summer, fall, winter, obviously. And so I think that it really takes people on a journey, like you're taking a trip and you're going throughout the year. And of course, the importance of the seasons, certain cities like New York, New York appears more than once. New York is a totally different vibe in January than it is in September. In September, you have the US Open tennis tournament. You have everybody's back from the Hamptons or back from the summer, like just the cities up and running, schools back in session. And then of course you have New York Fashion Week and ballet. So there's so much happening. But then January, it's like after the winter break, people are back, they're trudging through the snow and they're usually not that cheery because they're freezing. And so Charlotte, on the other hand, she's happy because she had a great time. I don't want to give a spoiler away, but she's really happy with her love life at that point. So she's bouncing around and, smiling and happy, while the laundromat and the bodega workers and whatnot, they're kind of like, this was crazy. But I definitely wanted to touch upon that. Also, both books, there's a ski trip, which the first one was Aspen. The second one is Park City, Utah, which I love Park City. So that was fun. I always wanted to add that in. And like I said, I hit not all the holidays, but Halloween and just hitting different holidays, Easter's in there, on Thanksgiving, of course. And yeah, so I wanted to touch upon the vibes because I think every city's different, but every city is also within itself different depending upon the season.
Sure. And I have to ask you too, so you alluded to the fact before that, these are rom-coms, and when readers are picking up these books, they know that they're going to get some kind of, happy ending. We may not know what kind of happy ending that's going to be, but I wanted to ask you, as a writer, how do you balance originality with also giving the readers what they anticipate and what they want from these books? Because this is a very fresh book, but the flip side of that coin is there are things that readers are going to expect to it. So you want to, have some ingenuity, but you also want to give them that familiar that they're looking for. So what is that process like for you when you're actually trying to do that balance within the writing?
Well, I think what's important is to have some side plots that are full of surprise. Like we have a 23andMe situation, and again, I don't want to give away too much, but there are elements of surprise throughout the book, especially with the more minor characters and what's going on in their lives. But of course, all the characters do end up interacting. And I think also with rom-coms, like, yes, like you said, people are expecting a happy ending, but the big question is, how will the characters get to that happy ending? So it's more about the journey. So, of course, this one's a love triangle. So is she going to realize that, her boss is the one? And what's funny is I've had readers tell me that who they're rooting for. So in this one, it becomes, do you want Wyatt or do you want Travis? I've had people like have issues with both of them, right? Neither of them are perfect. There's no perfect people in this world, but they have their positives and their negatives. So it's more like, is she going to get tired of dealing with Wyatt being so difficult with communication? Or maybe she'll figure out the whole communication situation. Or maybe, look at Travis, he's such a gentleman. So maybe she's going to go for him. And, but wait, he is her boss, so that's a little tricky too. And I just think that people will enjoy the surprises in the book.
I agree with you, and it must be nice to know that your readers are, so invested. I mean, I think that's great when there are teams. It's like Team Jacob versus Team whatever. In Twilight, we get very involved in these things, and we feel passionately about, who you want to come out the victor. But before we move away from these books and talk just a little bit more generally for a brief period of time, I just want to ask you specifically about Charlotte for a moment, if you wouldn't mind. One of the things, that stood out to me is she feels, or maybe she's made to feel, that despite all of her professional success, she hasn't necessarily achieved in her personal life what other people expect of her, whether that's, marriage, children, being settled down. So in a broad sense, can you talk about, how you hoped her character would represent real women, or, men who find themselves in a place where maybe they feel from their family or from society in general that they haven't lived up to other people's expectations of who or what they should be?
That's a very interesting question, because society does have expectations, or at least a lot of people feel that way. And what happens I mean, I can speak from the female perspective, but I think for men as well, a lot of people feel pressured that, okay, by this age, that you should be making a certain salary, for example, or you should be married by a certain age or have children. And every journey is so unique. Some families might not put as much pressure. In the case of Charlotte, she is from a Catholic family. And it seems that everybody around her is getting engaged or having kids, all her friends. And it's not that she wants to be a follower. It's a few things. She does want to be a mother someday, but she's put everything to the side for her career. And we see the first book, she matures quite a bit, because in the beginning of the first book, this isn't really a spoiler, but she gives herself a year to find the one. And she's like, I'm going to find a husband by the end of the year. She also has a condition with her ovaries where she probably can't have a baby when she's 40. So it's like she has to hurry up and get this on the road. So she feels the pressure, but then she also learns different lessons about maybe the family isn't what you think. There's other options. There's adoption, there's surrogacy, there's IVF, there's different options if you don't go the traditional route. So the first book was a lot of lessons and a lot of maturity for Charlotte. And then in the second book, it's, she really wants Wyatt, but at the same time, she wants to have attention and be loved and not always be waiting on the sidelines. And then here comes Travis. So therein is the whole, love triangle portion of the book. But I think that it is very important for my characters to grow, and not just Charlotte, but some of the other characters as well. There's a big topic about when you have a frenemy and you have a falling out with a friend. And I think most people have experienced this in one way or another, where you lose a friendship and then sometimes there can be tension, and there's a lot of drama there between her and Tracy, her former best friend. And Charlotte isn't perfect again, so she's not always nice. And that is challenging, because you want your protagonist to be likable, but you also need to show their flaws. So I think for writers that it's very important. They can't be perfect. They have to make some mistakes along the road. And a wise friend of mine once said, we're all here to learn something. And she had lost her fiance to cancer. I lost the love of my life to technically sepsis, but also he had cancer. And it really resonated with me. Like, we are on this journey. We are supposed to learn. I don't know about you, but I am a much nicer person than I was when I was 15, or more enlightened, I should say. I think I was always nice, but I feel like I've just matured so much over the years. And I think that is pretty common. Like, when you compare an 80-year-old person to a 22-year-old person, like, just totally different priorities and different interests in life. So here it is a year in each book. So Charlotte can only progress so much, but she definitely does. There's those aha moments. And I think that's important. I think we all have them in life, where there's an aha moment where you realize things are not what you thought they were, or you learn to accept something, you learn to forgive somebody, or you learn how to communicate with somebody you care about. Maybe there was tension for a long time, and then you realize, okay, wait, I need to communicate differently. So yeah, it's a journey. It's definitely a journey.
Yeah, but I think that, makes her really relatable to readers, and especially in the modern age where, traditional doesn't really, exist anymore. There aren't necessarily traditional relationships, or, those touchstones at a specific point in time. And so people who are living in this world now are going to obviously see that reflected in Charlotte. And I want to thank you too. Thank you for sharing your, personal story. I'm sorry for your loss, but I truly understand what you're saying. I lost my father to cancer. I lost my brother to cancer. And it's wild to think it was just a couple of years ago, but I'm older now than he was then. And like you said, it really does change your perspective. Even if you have a pretty good perspective on life, you live through that, and then you realize that every day is a gift. It might not be a great day, but it sort of beats the alternative. Would you rather have a bad day or a day than no day at all? So I appreciate that point that you brought up, because I really do think that perspective, makes all the difference in the world, and life certainly has a way of teaching us about that, even when we don't expect it.
It's so true. And I'm sorry about your father. It's so hard to lose a loved one. And I'm sorry that you experienced that. But I will say, Charlotte in the book, she had lost her father to a drunk driving accident. So we learned that in the first book, but it comes up because when she's traveling the world, she keeps him with her. There's a scene in Florence where she's looking at, a painting, and it's the birth of Venus. It's bringing her, she's like, my father he would have loved it. She gets emotional because she's always thinking about him. When she goes to Boston, she goes just for a quick day trip, or 2-day trip, actually. She hadn't been there since she was 15, and she went with her family, and she flashes back. She remembers how she was like a grumpy teenager, with probably pimples or whatever. And now she thinks back, and how her father was a history buff, and she thinks back, gosh, I wish I could go back in time. And by putting little things like that in the book, I hope it will remind people to really love their loved ones while they have them here.
Right. And that was another element of the story I really enjoyed, because I think, every loss sort of is unique, and we sort of find ourselves feeling, well, nobody, feels what I feel, and nobody can relate to what I just went through. But then, you talk to somebody like you, or you read a book like this, and you realize that, yes, the losses are unique, but it's also kind of a universal thing. And there are people who feel what you're feeling, or something, very similar. So again, I think that that's something that fiction really is powerful in empathy building in that way. So thank you so much for sharing that. And, I did want to ask you, and I think that this might come back to your fiance a bit from what I've read, but I wanted to ask you, about your transition to writing. What compelled you, having had such a distinguished career, in public relations, to also do the writing? And what do you get from writing that you don't get through your other work? What is the power of storytelling for you?
Well, it's definitely a creative outlet. And so what happened, with my significant other before he passed, I was always probably torturing him with stories about all the wild things going on with the restaurant group that I was with, and other clients that I was consulting for. And he would kind of joke that I should turn it into a book. I mean, I've always been an avid traveler as well, and I get really into the places I go. I did an apartment swap when I was in New York with a photographer in Paris. So I got to stay there for 6 weeks. I wish 6 months, that would have been amazing. But just to become part of the local landscape and see what the locals are doing. I studied in Amsterdam for a year for graduate school. So I'm familiar with going to different places and embracing the culture. And so, yeah, he would kind of tease me. And one day I said, you know what, I am going to write a book. And I did toy with other topics. I'm like, oh, maybe like airline stewardesses. Like I had some good, or flight attendants, I should say. I don't think we use stewardesses anymore, but flight attendants. And I was thinking of some ideas, but then, as I mentioned earlier, why don't I write what I know? And I know this wild restaurant world. And also, what I love about the restaurant world is that everybody who's listening has been to a restaurant at some point in their life. If they live in New York, they probably go more than people living in other parts of the world, or it just depends on their habits and culture. But what I love is restaurants are where people go to celebrate some of the happiest times. It could be somebody's birthday or anniversary or graduation. You go to a restaurant. So it's really an important part of our society, restaurants. And I thought, why don't I incorporate that and take some of my adventures and, of course, twist and turn it around, because this is fiction. It's somewhat autobiographical, but trust me, it's fictionalized. I mean, I respect everybody that I've worked with in the past, so I would never want to embarrass anybody. So I've twist and turn things around, but the locations and the feelings and the vibes and some of the scenarios, let's just put it that way, are based on fact and my experiences. So it's a nice combination. And I think that hopefully there are elements of the book that will resonate with others when they're reading it. And bringing it full circle. So unfortunately, he passed away he was diagnosed September. So October 2018, the 5-year anniversary recently passed. And I had the book completed. However, of course, other edits were required. I mean, hours upon hours of edits. But I was shopping it around at the time, and then he passed. So some people have asked, like, is Wyatt him? Is that the love of my life who passed away? But it's not, because he was still alive. I wasn't expecting that to happen.
Right.
But some of maybe the communication frustrations, or some of the situations were things that I could relate to. But also, over the years, I've dated probably way too many people. So I could, it's New York and things move quickly. And so I've had lots of dates, and I could incorporate some of those adventures within the characters. But I was happy on the first one to dedicate the book to him. And then also, of course, in the acknowledgments in both books, I talk about him, because I do credit him with really kind of motivating me to go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's great. I think it's another way that his legacy will live on. And, obviously he knew before that happened that you were pursuing this. And sometimes we really just need someone to give us that little push in the direction that we want to go in. And we just haven't fallen over the brink until someone kind of is like, okay, you just need to do this, and then you do.
And there was that little part of me that wanted to, like, impress him too,
Right, yeah, of
So
course.
I do feel that it's a product of love, but also I've had this writer streak within me forever, starting with my graduate school thesis. And as a publicist, what a lot of people don't realize, press releases, for example, and I'm choosing my words carefully, but we labor over them, and we have to get the messaging down, and you have to keep it concise and brief. But also, there are many journalists who will lift out of the press release, or say, ask for a paragraph explaining something or another, and then they'll kind of lift what you've created or what you've crafted. And so I just want to emphasize that a key to being a good publicist is you do need writing skills.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So final 2 questions, because I promised I wouldn't keep you all here all night. I feel like I could, but
I'm having fun with you.
I'm having fun with you as well, obviously, I think. But I want to ask you, you now have 2 books to your credit, and I think that there are a lot of people always tuning in who have similar ambitions and just, haven't found the courage or the fortitude or the reason to really immerse themselves in the work. So if you wouldn't mind, reflecting on your journey for a moment, what is it you think that is the best advice that you were ever given in terms of a writing life, and then the best advice that you were never given and had to learn throughout the process of actually doing the work yourself?
So as far as creating the manuscript or actually getting it published?
Either.
So,
Your
okay.
choice.
Okay, so I'll reflect a bit. It definitely was a journey, and the advice that I think most people will find out there, because trust me, I was Googling and talking to people, everybody says you have to have a literary agent. And so I wrote my manuscript, And I was very dedicated. I was like, okay, 3 hours every day. I actually went to the library and turned off my phone where I had no interruptions and there was limited parking. So I'm like, I'm sitting there in front of my computer. Of course, you know, I outlined everything. I knew how I wanted the story to be, but I would just type away, type away. So after the first draft, I think every writer will tell you, they usually make tons of edits and rip it apart. I had too many characters in it, and actually combined characters. I combined friends, like two friends I would combine into one person, and I had to tighten it up and get my word count down and work on it quite a bit. But everybody says you need a literary agent. So I created a spreadsheet. I knew all the ones that specialized in romantic comedy, and I was knocking on doors via email or sometimes phone calls. And I did have some interest, and a few wanted, you know, they all ask for different things. Like maybe they want one chapter or just your synopsis. Oh, the synopsis is one of the most difficult things that a writer will have to write, because you have to do your entire book in one page, and including the ending. Like you have to have the spoilers. You're just pitching your book. This is why it's interesting, but it feels so weird because you feel like you don't want to give the ending away, right? But you have to, and it's challenging for sure. But I had some interest, but it was taking forever. And then a friend of mine, bless her heart, she had worked with the publisher at Post Hill Press, and she said, "Why don't you talk to him directly?" So this was interesting advice, because everywhere I read, you cannot go to the publisher. You must get representation, and then they will go to the publisher. That's what it says everywhere. Trust me, I've checked it. But, you know, and they'll say there's very, very rare cases. Obviously, if you are Bono or Kim Kardashian or whatever, then you get a book deal, and it's a whole different rodeo, a whole different journey. But I spoke with the publisher and explained, like, I'm a publicist. He was familiar with the restaurant group that I was representing, and he really liked the story and the idea. And so he gave me my break. So I encourage people, if you can, go to the publisher. And some of them, though, probably will come back, oh, are you represented? But some of them won't. And you have to, if you can, position yourself as an expert. Like if you write a YA novel and, you know, there's some bullying themes or whatever, if you're a teacher, then maybe you don't realize it, but you are knowledgeable about this. So you have credibility. And I think that publishers like that. Or like I said before, if you're a police officer, you have some credibility in the crime world, if you wrote a book on that topic. So that was my journey. And I guess the best advice was from my friend who said, why don't you go direct? I was on the verge of representation. And see, that's kind of tricky too, because then if you're working with somebody, they said they wanted me to keep rewriting it and changing things here and there. And I remember I said, okay, I had this hour meeting and they had all these notes about this character was unlikable. And I said, okay, I think I could have that to you in about 5 weeks. Would that be okay? And oh, take your time. We're not in a hurry. For me, that was a warning sign, because I was in a hurry. I wanted to get it published. I'm like, oh, they're working on so many other projects. They don't care if this happens in 4 years. I have another friend, she's doing more of an organic beauty book, but she talked to me about it. I want to say May, and she's like, yeah, I want to have this done by September. I'm like, people don't understand how long it takes. And even there, she has recipes. She's not doing character development and whatnot, but there's photography. There's just so much in every book. Don't think you're going to have it done in a few months. Like, it's a labor of love. It takes, I mean, some people never get it published, but now this is what I love about self-publishing. They can go that route, but it takes sometimes years to get your book published. And then a friend of mine did erotic romance, and that one just came out, and it's not a genre that I usually read, but she was very excited about it. So she ended up going the self-publishing route, and that's been working out very well for her. 50 Shades of Grey, some people don't realize, was self-published first.
Right.
So yeah, nobody should. And then it was picked up by another publisher because it was so, or a traditional publisher because it was so popular. So what I want is for people to go for it and not feel discouraged. I mean, rejection, that's another thing. Get used to it. I mean, you're going to get rejected. I mean, in life in general, but also in the book world, you will get rejected. But know that now there are options where you can self-publish, but be prepared. Even traditional publishing at this point, once you do get it published, oh, the work is far from over. Then you have to get people to know about it and read it. So the marketing aspect, and it's a lot of work, especially with social media. But again, it's a labor of love. And then the joy that you feel when somebody's read your work and they like it is great. Oh, one other thing. Sorry, I could go on forever. So if you
Oh,
have
this
to
is
edit
great.
this out
I am
later,
mining. This is awesome.
feel free to cut some of this out later. No, be careful about reading reviews, because it doesn't matter if you're like, I don't know, the Pope or Giada de Laurentiis, the famous chef who just seems so nice and sweet, but then people sometimes will massacre her in reviews.
Right.
And I never quite understood it, but I guess with time I realized that there's some mean people in this world, and they just like to say mean things. And sometimes, maybe they haven't even read a book, or even in my own book club, there's a few people where every book they just rip it to shreds, and I think they're enjoying it. And these are like bestsellers, big time books. And so they say it's important for authors, if you're going to read them, okay, but don't respond. And I mean, fortunately, because my topic is rom-com books are not that controversial, but I haven't had this one person once said it's about a rich girl in New York. And I'm like, no, this was the first book. I'm like, she's living in a studio. She can't make her rent. She's underpaid. Like, why did you think she was a rich girl? I mean, maybe because she's traveling for work a lot, but, I wanted to say that, but you can't. Just don't engage with the haters. It's frustrating because it's like, I wanted to defend Charlotte McPherson and say, no, she's really not that there's anything wrong with rich people, but she's not rich. She can barely afford New York City. And a lot of people who moved there in their 20s from other places probably know the hustle and the struggle that it takes to be a New Yorker. So that's why I made her from California. I'm from Orange County, and this is where I probably maybe I got a little too close to home, because people really think it's like totally autobiographical. But you're from Orange County, and then you moved to New York and worked there for 15 years. And anyway, but I wanted
Downside of write what you know.
Exactly.
People think it's literal. It's not always like literal what you know. It's just you draw on it.
That's the downside. But I wanted to contrast like West Coast, East Coast. I mean, I don't want to go overboard in stereotypes, but I want to have a little fun with it too. Like the Southern guy versus the New Yorker, and just Wyatt himself. He is from Utah originally. Doesn't drink alcohol, like the total opposite of all the men that Charlotte's used to. And I just like to have fun with the different regions, but it's all done with respect. And like I said, I have a problem. I fall in love with almost every place I go visit. And I think, I want to come back. I want to live here. Maybe I could be here part-time. Maybe I could, and then I realize this world is just too big to live everywhere and to see everything. Especially the big choice all the time with travel is, do you want to go back to a place you've already been or that you loved, or see somewhere new? So I don't know. Do you get a chance to travel very much?
It's true, not so much, not anymore. But I feel that because if it's a place that you loved, it's like it's that known factor, and you know what you're getting. You know you're going to be satisfied, and there's always the risk that if you take the other option, maybe you won't enjoy it as much. I'm that way with TV. Like, am I going to watch a movie that I've seen 20 times and know that I love, or take a chance on something that I might not even like? So that's obviously a much smaller point of reference, but I totally get it, especially being an indecisive person. Like,
Well, it's very common with food. When people go to a restaurant, they've done studies, and there's something in the brain. So if you go back to a restaurant you were at a month ago and you had a really good dish, chances are you will order the exact same dish as before, because there's that risk. If you try something new, you might not like it as much as their specialty of the house. So that's one other thing with the book. I did get rather descriptive with the food, as you mentioned earlier. And I remember one editor was like, I don't think you need all this detail. And I'm like, no, but it's a big part of it. Food really sets a vibe, sets a tone. And eating, even in dating, I know that some vegetarians, they will not go out with a meat eater. Like meat makes them sick, or vice versa. On dating apps, I've seen men say no vegetarians. Okay. So, it's the eating, alcohol, like these are all things that factor in the mood, the way people feel. Like, oh, are they having, I don't know, some rosé, or maybe like a refreshing iced tea? If they order iced tea, they're probably not freezing. It's probably a warm day. So I really love using food to set a scene.
I love reading that. These books should come with a warning, like do not read on an empty stomach. Just like slap a sticker on it. Um,
I love that.
I'm all about the food. Like you said, it really does help set the scene. And we all relate to that, because there's like nothing much I look more forward to than a good meal. And I am that person. I will get this from this restaurant and that from that restaurant. And every time I deviate, I end up hating myself for it. Like,
Yes. Exactly. That happened yesterday. I went out with a friend for lunch, and she said, "What are you getting?" I said, "Of course, the same thing I always get." I'm not going to risk it. It's so good. I need this. But it's something, I wish I knew the scientific terms. There's something that releases in your brain. And so it's like your brain wants it again to get that joy. Yeah.
there you go. It's truth. All right. So final question for you. I mean, using personal experience is my guide. Like, people are going to read this book really, really quickly and enjoy it. And of course, if they haven't read the first book, they can go back and read that book as well. But again, a matter of hours, a matter of days, and then we will be waiting for the next book. So I have to ask you, can you leave us with a teaser? What comes next? What are you working on now? And what can you divulge about it, if anything?
Okay, well, there's two things. One does pertain, Four Seasons at Cutler's. There will be a third book because the story is not over. So yeah, happy endings sometimes can change within 24 hours, right? So yeah, so there will be a continuation, and it's in the works. Also, I have written a book that is inspirational fiction. So if you're familiar with that genre, Mitch Albom, for example, he wrote Tuesdays with Morrie is not an inspirational fiction. That's one of his most famous books, but he's written The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. He's my favorite author. So anyway, I wrote an inspirational fiction that deals with the grief that I had when I lost the love of my life, but also there's other characters in it, and how sometimes when you're grieving, the people you can relate to the most are other people who are grieving. And anyway, so it's an inspirational fiction book, and I wrote it and then I put it away for like 2 years, 3 years, I don't know. But I'm coming back to it, and I think that it's going to turn out great, and hopefully will lead to some healing for some people out there who read it.
Excellent. So we obviously have much to look forward to, which always makes me happy. But in the meantime, pick up Four Seasons at Cutler's and you can travel the world with Charlotte. Thank you so much, Caroline McBride. It was such a joy talking with you.
Thank you, John. It's been an honor. So I appreciate you and everything that you're doing.
Oh, thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.